Sup, chooms? So, I've been shitting on RFK Jr. pretty hard recently, so I think it's time we give him a break and move on to another subject. Nah, I'm just kidding. Let's put this conspiracy theorist asshat to the fire once more. So, RFK Jr. is an overall loathsome human being. His vaccine misinformation has literally killed people, including children. Putting someone like him in charge of the Health and Human Services Department is a travesty that threatens the health and safety of every American and puts many vital treatments at risk of being banned or at least severely restricted, including finasteride, because this guy is also a big pharma conspiracy theorist. There are many proposals RFK Jr. supports that put the health of the American people in danger, such as eliminating vaccine research, ending water fluoridation, and promoting more saturated fat in the diet, but perhaps the dumbest thing he wants to do is stop the pasteurization of milk. RFK Jr. is a raw milk enthusiast who thinks that the invention of milk pasteurization was all a big mistake that was never really necessary and that it removes vital nutrients, or as Sverige would say, nutrients from the white goop. In fact, RFK Jr. claims that he only drinks raw milk.
All I can say is that since I was here last year, I only drank raw milk.
So why anyone would take dietary advice from a guy who eats roadkill is beyond me. But not surprisingly, there is a whole internet culture supporting raw milk consumption led primarily by internet tough guy culture warriors and crunchy moms like this one. Well, I'm here to tell you that RFK Jr., as usual, is completely wrong once again. Raw milk is the most dangerous and unhealthy thing you can purchase at a supermarket. It isn't just one of the most dangerous things, it literally is the most dangerous thing. You'd even be better off buying cigarettes and alcohol because at least those kill you slowly. I don't know what made RFK Jr. the way he is, where he thinks mainstream scientific opinion is always wrong and that every conspiracy theory is true. I mean, maybe he has PTSD as a consequence of his uncle and father both being assassinated while he was a young man, which would be sympathetic at least, or maybe it's the brainworm that's causing it. In fact, the brainworm story is even more reason not to trust RFK Jr.'s dietary advice. The worm he had was probably a pork tapeworm, and the most likely reason for the parasitic infection is that he ate raw or undercooked pork. Or maybe RFK Jr. is part of a secret plot by the Democratic Party to commit genocide against Republican voters, since even right-wingers have now embraced RFK Jr., even though he is a lifelong Democrat. But I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt here. I'm going to assume that he really does believe in all this bullshit about raw milk and then tear him to shreds about it. The reason I feel compelled to make a video about this particular subject is because raw milk is being heavily promoted by alt-right health influencers, and so far I have seen very little pushback against it. Maybe it's because they're all afraid of being called woke or cucks. Thanks to RFK Jr. though, raw milk is likely going to be even more widely available nationwide than it is already, and the health misinformation that is being posted online about raw milk is putting people's lives in danger, so I can't in good conscience say nothing about it. Whether or not people will actually listen to me though is an entirely different story, but at least by trying to convince people of raw milk's dangers, I'll be able to sleep better at night. Full disclosure though, I don't think human beings breastfeeding from another animal, whether it be a goat or a cow, is healthy in the slightest. I don't think anyone needs to consume cow's milk, and whatever nutrition milk has can be better obtained from other sources. But there is a huge difference between something that is unhealthy and something that is outright toxic. Almost everybody, including myself, sometimes consumes unhealthy food once in a while, but nobody should ever consume something that is toxic like raw milk. Okay, chums, so as you probably already know, the milk that people normally buy in the grocery store is not raw milk, it is pasteurized milk. Pasteurization is a process that started way back in the 19th century and is named after Louis Pasteur, who is the French scientist who proved that diseases were caused by germs. Pasteurization is simply the process of using a brief application of moderate heat to kill the germs found in milk. The process isn't that complicated. You can either heat milk to a lower temperature for a longer time duration or use a higher temperature for a shorter duration. So, the pasteurization process can use 63 degrees centigrade, which is 145 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Or the temperature can be up to the boiling point, which is 100 degrees centigrade or 212 degrees Fahrenheit for just a tenth of a second. But the most commonly used protocol is to heat the milk to 72 degrees centigrade for 15 seconds. That's it. That's all there is to it. Just a brief heating and poof, the germs are all gone. Yet, raw milk proponents claim that this ruins the natural taste of the milk and destroys all the milk's nutrients. But as I'll show you all in a moment, this is all complete bullshit. First of all though, why exactly does milk need to be pasteurized? It's because pasteurization destroys or inactivates bacteria and viruses in milk, and it's necessary because raw milk is frequently contaminated by organisms that can cause diseases in humans that can even be fatal. So, I'm sure some raw milk guzzler fanboy in the comment section is writing right now, "But Kevin, I only get my raw milk from healthy, organic, and grass-fed cows. It's completely safe, bro. Didn't you know that?" Unfortunately, if you believe that, you are living in a fantasy world and likely have a brainworm yourself. Contaminated milk can originate from any cow, including cows that appear to be completely healthy. That's because even in healthy cows, there are bacteria that live on the skin of the teat or in the teat canal, and these bacteria, which include staph and strep, as well as other hazardous species, can contaminate the milk. On top of that, cows often have mastitis, meaning infection of their milk glands, and this is often not apparent at all. In fact, in random testing of milk samples, the presence of mastitis was found in about 50% of animals. The most common bacteria causing mastitis, again, were staph and strep. There are also many other disease-causing bacteria that cows can harbor even though they appear completely normal and healthy. These organisms include Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella, and other bacteria like C. burnetii, which causes a disease called Q fever and which is found in 94% of milk collected from farms in the United States, including traditional ma and pa farms. Another bacteria, Paratuberculosis, is found in at least 68% of dairy herds in the USA. Does that sound like an appetizing addition to your breakfast cereal, Chooms? I should remind you, Chooms, that even if the cows are perfectly healthy, milk can still be contaminated after collection because the farm environment, no matter where you go, is fundamentally dirty and contaminated with many pathogens, including Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli, and many others. On top of all that, milk is a perfect culture medium for growing bacteria. Bacteria love to grow in it because it is full of the nutrients that bacteria crave. So if you are a bacteria, then raw milk is the perfect beverage for you. Now, if you refrigerate milk, it won't kill the bacteria, but it will slow the growth of most bacteria. However, one notable exception is Listeria, which continues to multiply rapidly even when refrigerated. And even if you slow the growth of bacteria with refrigeration, it's still not going to be enough because even low numbers of bacteria can cause fatal human illnesses. So, raw milk idiots love to romanticize our ancestors, yet ironically, the risk of drinking raw milk has been known about for centuries. So, even our ancestors would think RFK Jr. and all these raw milk chugging mommy bloggers are complete idiots. Pasteurization has been a staple of food safety for centuries, and this simple process has undoubtedly prevented countless illnesses and saved millions of people's lives. Back in the 19th century and early 20th century, tuberculosis, TB, was a major cause of death in humans, and TB was often transmitted to humans through cow's milk. By 1900, 10% of human tuberculosis cases were caused by infection from milk, and TB was running rampant throughout the cattle herds. In fact, between 1912 and 1937, it was estimated that at least 65,000 people in England and Wales died from tuberculosis originating from cattle. So, in 1924, the U.S. Public Health Service recommended milk pasteurization, but it was only a recommendation and not a law, so not all states adopted the guideline right away. In 1938, it was estimated that milk-borne disease outbreaks made up 25% of all disease outbreaks related to food or water, while by 2015, with the widespread use of pasteurization, milk products accounted for less than 1% of these outbreaks. So, pasteurization is one of medicine's great success stories, and based on its benefits, raw milk sales should absolutely be banned from the country and the world completely. But unfortunately, the federal government left this up to the states, which has turned out to be a big mistake for the public health. The only thing the federal government has actually done to prohibit raw milk is to ban the interstate shipment of raw milk in 1987. So, back in 2006, the sale of raw milk was illegal in 26 states. However, there were loopholes to get around that. A couple ways to get around the law on raw milk is to label it as pet food or by leasing cows so that people pay for the cows but don't directly pay for the raw milk. But that was back in 2006. Since then, more and more states have been legalizing the sale of raw milk, likely for political reasons since pasteurization is now considered woke. In 2011, the number of states banning raw milk had decreased to 20 states. And as of 2023, it is legal in some degree to buy raw milk in all but 4 states and Washington, D.C. So, here's a map of the status of raw milk sales in the United States, but the map is from 2018, so it is a little out of date, and there are even more states allowing raw milk sales now than on this map. However, raw milk is illegal in Canada, but we'll see what happens after Trump conquers it and it becomes the 51st state of the USA. So, in 2017, this study looked at the impact of raw milk consumption on disease outbreaks in the United States. The study found that almost all the dairy-related illnesses in the United States are caused by unpasteurized dairy products. Even though at the time only 3.2% of the population consumed unpasteurized milk and only 1.6% consumed unpasteurized cheese, those people consuming raw milk products were 838 times more likely to get sick and 45 times more likely to be hospitalized than people consuming pasteurized milk products. However, proponents of raw milk were given a lifeline when this article appeared in 2018. The article claimed that even though more and more states were legalizing raw milk, the number of disease outbreaks related to raw milk was actually going down. The authors hypothesized that this supposed decline in outbreaks was due to improved safety programs for handling raw milk. The study claimed that the outbreak rate had declined by 74% since 2005. This result triggered a bunch of responses from raw milk simps who claimed that the study proved that the CDC was lying about raw milk and it was clearly a safe beverage to drink. However, this 74% decrease is a made-up number. It's complete fiction. It's based on an estimate of how many people drank raw milk based on the number of licensed dairy farms there are and the population growth in the country. If you look at the actual data on outbreaks versus population, though, you see that the number of outbreaks actually increased from 2005 to 2016. The curve drawn on the graph looks like an increase and then a decrease because 2010 and 2011 were bad years for raw milk outbreaks. Also, there were reporting problems in the year 2009, which is why the number of cases in that year were so unusually low, but to me, this graph is not very reassuring that the number of cases is actually going down. Also, regarding the claims that the CDC is lying about the data, guess where this data actually comes from? It comes from the CDC. Also, you can see from this earlier study on the number of outbreaks related to raw milk, there's a lot of variability from year to year in the number of outbreaks, so it is hard to just look at a few years of data and conclude that there is a real trend one way or the other. There's another study that analyzed the same data, but looked specifically at the number of disease outbreaks per state. This study right here. The study showed that in states where raw milk sales were allowed or herd sharing was allowed, there was a much higher incidence of milk-related outbreaks than in states where raw milk was banned. The study concluded, quote, "In conclusion, we find that access to unpasteurized milk continues to result in outbreaks in the United States. Most outbreaks occurred in states where the sale of unpasteurized milk is expressly allowed by law and children were more affected compared with other age groups," unquote. So even if you believe that raw milk has become safer over the last few years and you are not worried about this list of bacteria and diseases that can be caused by raw milk, there's something new in the mix that should definitely give you cause for concern. And that new element is the same thing that is causing egg prices to continue to be sky high 2 months after President Trump said he would bring them down on day one of his administration. That's right, we're talking about the bird flu, chooms. Bird flu, also known as the H5N1 virus, has been found in dairy cows. From 2022 up until March of 2025, bird flu has been detected in nearly 1,000 dairy herds in 17 states. The good news is that pasteurization kills the bird flu in milk. The bad news is that there is a risk of transmission of bird flu to humans if raw milk from an infected cow is drunk. If bird flu mutates enough to spread through the human population, it will make COVID look like a walk in the park. COVID had a mortality rate of less than 1%, but H5N1 has a mortality rate of nearly 50%. Of the 954 recorded cases of human infection with the bird flu virus, 464 cases were fatal. So, despite the obvious risk of drinking raw milk, almost half of Americans surveyed think that raw milk is just as safe or safer than pasteurized milk, or they're not sure about it. This attitude is undoubtedly due to social media brain rot that has been inspired by public health figures like RFK Jr., who are ignoring all the best scientific data in the world to push raw milk onto the public. Health and political influencers on social media are also heavily promoting raw milk now, largely due to politics and culture war bullshit, since raw milk has become part of their conservative political identity, and they think that by drinking it, they're owning the libs. Of course, they'll never admit that raw milk is just a cringy culture war battle for them, so here's what they'll try to claim. The first claim they make is that raw milk tastes better than pasteurized milk. The claim that it tastes better is bogus. It's just anecdotal and not based on any objective measurement. In fact, one newspaper food reporter did a blind taste test and found that the raw milk tasted thinner and less sweet than commercial pasteurized milk, much to the disappointment of the raw milk simp doing the test.
So you said there's a difference in taste. So we're going to try a blind taste test with regular whole milk from the supermarket and Pasteur-Schultz raw milk. Okay, so Kaneko here is going to blindfold me, and we're going to do a taste test to see if I can tell the difference between raw and regular. So don't tell me which one's first. Okay. Okay. So you can start pouring. All right. Yeah. Go ahead.
With the raw milk, you do have to shake it up because the cream does separate to the top.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. Thank you. Oh, it's kind of creamy. Yeah. Okay.
Ready?
Okay. Second glass. Okay. This one tastes more watery. I don't know. I feel like it tastes more watery. So. Okay.
So, the first glass that you had was the store-bought.
Oh, really?
The second glass.
I guess I didn't like the second one.
The
So, anyone who drinks raw milk and thinks it tastes better is just experiencing a placebo effect. It's the same situation as when you give people tap water in a fancy bottle and then tell them that the water comes from the glaciers of Finland. But even if raw milk did taste better, which it doesn't, that still is not a good reason to drink it. But raw milk simps claim that it has many health benefits too. They claim that pasteurization destroys the nutrients in milk. So, let's go ahead and examine that claim. First of all, the effects of pasteurization on milk proteins and on vitamins in milk have been extensively studied, and the results show minimal or no changes on these elements in milk. Pasteurization doesn't cause any change in protein quality. It does cause a small degree of protein denaturation, which means unfolding of proteins, but all these proteins are denatured in the stomach anyways, so it doesn't affect the nutritional value of the proteins at all. In addition, there is no effect on the mineral content of milk and only minor effects on vitamin levels. Raw milk crybabies also point to studies claiming that kids who drink raw milk have fewer allergies and less asthma. However, like I pointed out many times in other videos, correlation does not equal causation. Kids growing up on farms have a lot of differences in their environments than kids growing up in the cities. In fact, in a farming environment, it has been shown that kids are exposed to certain bacteria that have strong allergy-protective properties. There are no studies proving any health benefits to raw milk over pasteurized milk at all, and raw milk is inherently unsafe because of the risk of bacterial or viral contamination causing food poisoning. But again, I must stress that raw milk proponents don't really care about health or nutrition, because this is all a culture war battle for them, so this is about politics, not health. So, you might be thinking, maybe there is a middle ground we can establish here. How about if we test raw milk first to make sure it's not infected? Well, that may seem like it makes sense, but testing is not the answer either. It's much too impractical because you can't test every single bottle of milk that gets sold, and with such a large-scale production, it's probable that infected bottles would still get through the process. Even small amounts of bacteria that aren't detected by testing can cause diseases that cause death. And also, even small amounts of bacteria can still proliferate in the milk after testing is done, so it's just not practical or logical to test every single bottle of milk when we know that pasteurization effectively reduces the risk of infection to nearly zero with no downside to health or nutrition. So, we've talked about raw milk a lot, but what about raw milk-derived products like cheese? Would aging raw milk cheese reduce the risk of contamination? Well, in the USA, the FDA requires raw milk cheese to be aged for 60 days before it can be sold. The hope is that the aging process kills the bacteria in cheese. However, it looks like this might not be the case for bird flu. Studies show that the H5N1 virus can survive aging for 60 days or longer. Of course, the obvious solution here is the same as it is for milk. Just briefly heat the milk before creating cheese from it. In other words, just use pasteurized milk to make the goddamn cheese. So, I'm sorry to say it, chums, but since milk comes from potentially sick animals in a dirty environment no matter where you get it from, you are taking a huge risk if you consume the raw milk. The only way to avoid getting sick from raw milk is to avoid drinking it altogether. Either drink pasteurized milk, plant milks, or avoid milk altogether. Unfortunately, according to a survey done in 2022, 4.4% of American adults have consumed raw milk at least once in the last year. And like I said before, despite all the risk of consuming raw milk, over 4 out of 10 Americans today either are not sure if raw milk is unsafe or they think it is just as safe to drink or safer to drink than pasteurized milk. Health influencers are pushing raw milk so hard on social media platforms like YouTube and TikTok that the anti-mainstream position has become the new mainstream position. So you don't get to call yourself a health rebel anymore if you drink raw milk. If you think raw milk is unhealthy, your opinions are now officially in the minority, at least on social media. So with RFK Jr. pushing raw milk as being both safe and healthy, those statistics are only going to get much worse very soon. So, I know what some of you are thinking right now. But Kevin, the science behind why raw milk is dangerous makes sense, but I still can't be against raw milk because my conservative political views don't allow it, bro. So, if you guys have watched my non-hair loss related videos, then you probably know that I'm definitely not a conservative, mostly because of their stance on many scientific issues, including raw milk. But there have been a lot of conservative intellectuals throughout history, like William F. Buckley, George Will, and even Richard Nixon. And even though I don't agree with most of their political views, one thing I've always admired about conservative intellectuals is that they tend to view the world as it really is, not just how they wish it would be. So, they base their opinions on reality, even if that reality is a bitter pill for some people to swallow. RFK Jr. is not a conservative. He's a lifelong liberal Democrat who saw an opportunity to seize power by sucking up to Trump. I don't believe for a second that Trump actually agrees with RFK Jr.'s health policies. Trump in his first term was responsible for Project Warp Speed, that fast-tracked COVID vaccine research, and he's proud of that accomplishment. He's even defended it to other conservatives, like when he was being interviewed by Candace Owens, who tried to get Trump to back down on his pro-vaccine stance, and he refused. I'll go ahead and show you the clip from the interview because it's almost surreal to watch given the current state of the conservative movement in the United States.
Which is a huge topic on the minds of mothers, especially. You're seeing what's happening at these school board meetings. Where do you stand on these vaccine mandates? And obviously, I know that you are pro-vaccine. Obviously, you did everything you could to get this vaccine out. I know where you stand on the vaccine.
It was one of the greatest achievements. We did it in less than 9 months.
To be able to do that. Yeah, but now it's taken a twist, right? It's gotten, now we went from, this is a good thing and people should have this option, to military men, you're going to have to resign because you're not getting this vaccine. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I stand on, forget about the mandates, that people have to have their freedom, but at the same time, the vaccine is one of the greatest achievements of mankind. We would have had in 1917, remember the Spanish flu, killed perhaps 100 million people. Actually, it ended the First World War because the soldiers were so, a lot of people don't know that. The soldiers got so sick. It was a terrible thing. There were no vaccines. There was no anything. I came up with a vaccine, with 3 vaccines. All are very, very good. Came up with 3 of them in less than 9 months. It was supposed to take 5 to 12 years.
And yet more people have died under COVID this year, by the way, under Joe Biden, than under you. And more people took the vaccine this year. So people are questioning how...
Well, no, the vaccine worked, but some people aren't taking it. The ones that get very sick and go to the hospital are the ones that don't take the vaccine. But it's still their choice. And if you take the vaccine, you're protected. Look, the results of the vaccine are very good. And if you do get it, it's a very minor form. People aren't dying when they take the vaccine.
So I definitely don't think Trump agrees with RFK Jr. on any of his health policies. The only reason why RFK Jr. is on Trump's cabinet is because Trump was desperate to win the election, since he knew that if he lost it, it probably meant he was going to jail, and he's hoping that RFK Jr.'s endorsement would help him win. So he promised him power in exchange for his endorsement, even though he doesn't agree with them. 10 years ago, conservatives would have been making fun of people like RFK Jr., but today, they're treating everything he says as gospel. Back in 2015, if I heard the way Republicans talk about health policy, I would think I was listening to some loon from the Green Party. So please listen, my conservative chooms. You don't have to embrace this kind of new age hippie bullshit to be considered a conservative. So if you like Trump, it's perfectly okay to think that RFK Jr. is a moron, because truth be told, I'm sure Trump thinks he's a moron too, but he no longer has the political capital to say it to his face, since conservatives all love RFK Jr. now. That's a shame, because that means that the Republican Party, which used to be led by red-pilled intellectuals, has now taken the blue pill and gotten cucked by the very same dirty, woo-promoting New Age hippies that they used to make fun of just 10 years ago. But whatever your political beliefs may be, I hope this video will convince you to skip the raw milk. Bloody diarrhea from salmonella or E. coli is no fun no matter what your political beliefs may be, and food poisoning from raw milk can even be fatal. Once again, it blows my mind that a lawyer with no training in medicine or public health whatsoever was put in charge of the health of the people of the United States, a nation that has over 300 million people living in it. I understand it was a politically strategic move by Trump, but the election is over now, so Trump should tell RFK Jr. to rightly fuck off, and he should tell all these raw milk hippies to go back to the Green Party where they rightfully belong. Alright. That's it for now, but I've got another hair loss related video coming soon, so thank you so much for watching, Hair Loss Witchers. I'll see you all next time. God bless.